How do you point a gun at the head of the global economy with nothing but 21 miles of water? Imagine a world where the lights in New York, the factories in Shanghai, and the hospitals in London all depend on a single, jagged needle eye in the Middle East. A passage so narrow that if you sank just 2 supertankers in the right spot, the global financial system wouldn't just stumble, it would flatline. Every day, hundreds of massive oil tankers pass through this corridor. At its narrowest navigable point, the shipping lanes are only a few kilometers wide in each direction. Tankers moving in opposite directions pass each other with almost no room for error. One wrong calculation, one act of deliberate sabotage, one mine placed in the dark, and the entire system stops. This is the Strait of Hormuz. It carries 20% of the world's oil, but its real cargo is something far more volatile: fear. And here is the first paradox. Oil prices are not determined only by supply and demand. They are shaped by geography and by the credibility of a threat. Markets react before a single ship changes course. The global economy runs on expectation as much as reality. A narrow waterway thousands of kilometers away can move the cost of fuel, food, and transportation across the entire planet without a single shot being fired. They call it the Jugular Vein of Humanity. But for the master strategists in Tehran, Washington, and Riyadh, it isn't a shipping lane. It is a lever, a trigger, a stage where crisis is not a disaster to be avoided, but a currency to be traded. In this 21-mile corridor, the line between a normal Tuesday and a global catastrophe is thinner than a radar signature. Today, we go beyond the blue water to reveal the hidden architecture of a century-old standoff. We discover how a tiny stretch of sea became the most expensive and most dangerous real estate on Earth. Before we step into the heart of the pressure point, subscribe to History Beyond Battle. Before the strait was a weapon, it was a bridge. On a world map, the strait appears almost insignificant, a thin line of water between vast land masses. But for 2,000 years, that thin line was the most connected highway on Earth. It was the road between civilizations. The pearl divers of Levant were legends. They didn't need instruments. They read the bottom of the sea with their feet. They connected the silk of China to the courts of Europe. Their lungs were their technology. Their knowledge of the tides was their inheritance. This was a world of Lenga boat builders on Keshem, assembling massive wooden ships entirely from memory, without blueprints, without computers. Techniques passed down through generations of seafarers who once connected this coast to India, East Africa, and China. It was a world of the Kariz, underground rivers filtered through 500-million-year-old coral, sustaining cities in a desert greenhouse without a single pump or engine. The people here understood a fundamental truth. The sea was a provider, not a border. They spoke a dialect that blended Portuguese, Arabic, Hindi, and Swahili, a linguistic map of a world that was open, fluid, and deeply human. But the mirage was built on a dangerous assumption, that the water belonged to the people who fished it. That geography was a gift, not a target. The architects were about to prove them catastrophically wrong. The modern strait was not designed by nature. It was designed by the architects of energy. In 1507, the Portuguese arrived. They didn't see a bridge between civilizations. They saw a fortress. They quarried the red stone of Hormuz Island and built walls to fix the sea in place, to command the flow of trade and convert geography into tribute. The Portuguese were the first architects, but they were not the last. The British arrived next, drawing lines across the Gulf that had nothing to do with the people living there. They divided coastlines, installed monarchies, and signed agreements that turned the sea into a balance sheet. They didn't see pearl beds. They saw hydrocarbon reservoirs. They didn't see islands. They saw strategic observation platforms. Then came the modern industrial state. The refineries on Levant replaced the pearl economy with a rotating shift of mainland workers. The dams built across 14 rivers choked Lake Urmia, an inland sea that had sustained 3 millennia of civilization, to fuel a dream of agricultural independence that the hydrology never supported. The architect's logic is always the same. Geography is a tool for command. If you militarize the horizon and digitize the water, you can guarantee the flow of wealth forever. You can turn a shared sea into a controlled grid. But the architects forgot something fundamental. The earth is still moving, the salt domes are still pressing upward, the tectonic plates are still grinding, and the people they displaced, the pearl divers, the boat builders, the women who ground red ochre into their bread, they are still here. The architects built their empires on a foundation they never fully understood, and in doing so, they created the very cracks that would eventually swallow them. When geography becomes a weapon, the first crack is called the Tanker War. In the 1980s, the Strait became a slaughterhouse. Iran and Iraq were locked in one of the bloodiest land wars of the 20th century, but both sides understood a second arithmetic. You don't need to win on land if you can bleed the world at sea. Iraq attacked tankers carrying Iranian oil. Iran attacked tankers carrying oil for Iraq's Gulf Arab backers. The Strait, the passage that too many nations depend on, became a minefield. Insurance rates exploded. Shipping companies rerouted. The global economy held its breath. And here is the ultimate political crack. Every actor used the same crisis for a completely different purpose. Iran used the Strait as a deterrent. The message was precise. If we are strangled by sanctions, if our exports are blocked, if our economy is targeted, then the world will not enjoy stability either. The threat of closure was more powerful than closure itself, because markets react before ships move. The United States used the crisis as a mandate. The U.S. Navy reflagged Kuwaiti tankers and escorted them through the Strait in Operation Earnest Will. The message was equally precise. Only American power can guarantee the flow of global energy. The crisis justified a permanent naval presence that has never left. The Gulf monarchies used the fear as a guarantee. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the UAE turned their vulnerability into a global security commitment. By being endangered, they became indispensable. By inviting foreign protection, they locked in alliances that would define the region for decades. And the people of the islands? They received nothing. On Hormuz Island, 20 million barrels pass their windows every day. The water they drink arrives by boat. The red soil they use for cooking has been placed under state restriction. The working-age population leaves every summer. Not for tourism, but for wages the island cannot generate. The jugular vein is pumping, but the body it feeds is not the body that lives here. The crisis isn't an accident. It is the system working exactly as the architects designed it. But beneath the radar of the architects, a counter-soul survives. It is not armed. It does not hold press conferences. It does not appear in the satellite imagery that the world's intelligence agencies study every morning. But it is the most durable force in the entire strait, because it has been here longer than every empire that tried to command this water. The counter-soul is the fisherman of Lerek, who reads the bioluminescent signals of the Gulf better than any sonar system. On still nights from late summer through autumn, phytoplankton near the surface produce waves of cold blue-green light, a biological map that tells him where the fish are schooling. No satellite subscription required, no algorithm, just 600 million years of geological memory encoded in the water itself. The counter-soul is the women of Hangam, the only female fisher women in the Persian Gulf, who row into the dark before dawn to work lines for barracuda, while the world's navies argue about who owns the horizon above them. It is the Tsar ceremony, the hypnotic drumming and collective trance practiced along this entire coastal region as a method of psychological recalibration under conditions of isolation, militarization, and environmental stress. a practice that predates formal medicine's arrival by centuries, a technology of survival that no architect has ever been able to patent. It is the Lenja boat builders of Keshem who still assemble ocean-going vessels entirely from memory. No blueprints, no computers, just the accumulated intelligence of generations who understood that the sea is not a threat to be managed. It is a condition to be inhabited. While the architects build steel refineries that will one day rust, the people of the islands build ships from memory. They practice a memory economy that the state cannot tax, that the tankers cannot crush, and that no sanctions regime has ever been able to reach. The counter-soul is the realization that the strait doesn't belong to the person with the biggest ship. It belongs to the person who can live in the cracks. We are standing on the threshold of a new reality. The Strait of Hormuz is often reduced to a single image, a choke point, a threat, a headline that appears whenever oil prices spike or a tanker disappears from its tracking signal. But the deeper truth is this: the strait has never been closed. Not once. Not during the tanker war, not during the sanctions crises, not during the tanker seizures of 2019, because closing it would harm nearly everyone involved. And every actor in this drama understands the same arithmetic. The system is not built on trust. It is built on mutual necessity. Energy exporters rely on the strait to sell their resources. Importing nations depend on it to power their economies. Shipping companies depend on predictable routes. Even Iran, the country most associated with threatening the passage, depends on it for its own exports. Closing the strait would be the geopolitical equivalent of shooting yourself to prove you have a gun. And yet the threat remains. Because in a world where markets react before ships move, you don't need to close the strait to use it. You only need to make the world believe you might. That is the final paradox of Hormuz. The most powerful weapon here is not a mine, not a missile, not an aircraft carrier. It is uncertainty. The managed, calibrated, deliberately sustained uncertainty that keeps insurance rates elevated, that keeps foreign navies present, that keeps the political leverage alive. As the climate shifts and the oil age begins its long, slow sunset, the nature of that leverage is changing. The blood-red waters of Lake Urmia are not a local environmental story. They are a preview. The coral bleaching on Keshem's reefs is not a tourism problem. It is a document. The disappearing fish stocks that force the women of Hangam to row further into the dark each season. That is the new tanker war, and it has no ceasefire. What the people of Hormuz already know about building culture from the minerals beneath their feet. What the people of Urmia already know about losing what cannot be restored. What the fishermen of Larak already know about reading light in the dark. None of this is local knowledge anymore. This is the future, arriving unevenly, but arriving everywhere. The architects thought they could buy stability with force, but you cannot build a skyscraper on a foundation of resentment. You cannot guarantee the flow of oil through a passage that the earth itself is still reshaping. The story of the strait is not about who controls the water today. It is about who will be left standing when the tide finally goes out. If you want to understand the forces that shape our world beyond the battlefield, subscribe to History Beyond Battle. And tell us, in a world where crisis is a currency and geography is a weapon, who do you think truly owns the water?